Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
My sister said I was too emotionally draining for Christmas, and she said it like she was canceling a streaming subscription that she never really watched. Breezy and righteous and a little bored, and I stared at the text blinking on my screen with that slow, metallic feeling that starts in your teeth and spreads through your chest. The one that tells you will remember the exact shape of this moment years from now when you finally admit to yourself that the line you kept pretending was made of rubber was actually made of glass, and you just heard it crack. I typed and deleted a dozen replies that sounded like holiday cards written by a hostage, then stopped because there is a moment when dignity shows up in a wrinkled coat and bad shoes and says, either you get in the car with me now or you stay here and keep dancing for people who boo you. So I put the phone down, boiled water for tea I did not really want, and walked to my desk where the neatly labeled folders lived like obedient soldiers, because if I was so emotionally draining, then my money could take a long, luxurious nap, and maybe my spine could finally wake up. For years, and let me say this without poetry, it was me, the monthly tuition that slid out of my account before I even saw my paycheck hit. The copays for the pediatric appointments that my sister promised to reimburse in group texts, then forgot inside a flurry of heart emojis. The deductibles that somehow never met themselves. The car repair that became my Christmas gift to her because apparently breaks were festive. The groceries I bought the night before Thanksgiving while she filmed a story about gratitude under good kitchen lighting, and the little cash pushes to our parents when the electric bill did that jump scare thing in February. And I did it all not because I am a saint or a sucker, but because I believed family was a bridge you keep repairing even when you are the only one holding a hammer. So I opened the portal for the insurance. And I will not lie, my hands were shaking, not with guilt, but with that strange adrenaline that shows up when you realize you can move the furniture inside your own life without asking permission. And I navigated to the dependents page where my sister's name sat like a smug holiday ornament, and I read the warning banner 3 times because the language is built to make you feel like a war criminal even when you are simply pressing a button, and then I pressed it, and the page refreshed, and the name disappeared, and a quiet landed in my apartment that felt like a snow day from childhood when the world goes soft and your breath sounds like you own it. Next, I opened the tuition platform where the autopay was scheduled like clockwork on the first Monday of every month, and I paused longer than I wanted because the kids are not the villains in this story, and they never were. And if I could write a different story for them, I would write it in bold Sharpie and staple it to the moon. But there is a difference between loving kids and feeding the lie that their mother built out of my account number, so I canceled the payments and sent a bland note to the bursar that read like office oatmeal, and I told myself I could revisit scholarships later, silently, without becoming the family's vending machine with a face again. People will say this is petty. People who have never been told they are invited to bring the casserole, but not the conversation, who have never had someone applaud their reliability while icing them out of the photographs, who honestly believe boundaries are cute until they cost something, and to those people I say it was not petty, it was precise, and it was late, and if there is a crime here it is that I waited this long to become an adult in my own story. Around dinner, my mother called with that cheerful tone she puts on like a church hat when she wants something to sound normal, and I let it ring because I knew I would hear the same script I have heard since high school. The one where I am the sturdy table everyone leans on, and the moment I ask someone else to set a plate, I am accused of flipping it, so I made pasta, poured a glass of grocery store red, and posted nothing because there is a freedom in choosing to have no audience for once, even if your hands twitch toward the camera by reflex. When my sister finally followed the text with a voice note, she layered it with compliments so sugary I could have poured them on pancakes. Little lines about how she loved my work ethic and how the kids adored my thoughtful gifts and how I should not take it personally that she needed a drama-free holiday, as if I were the pop quiz in her life that kept ruining recess, and I listened once, just once, then held my thumb over the block button and did nothing because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone talk into a hallway where their voice echoes back to them without a couch to fall onto. By midnight, I had a neatly typed list of what I would no longer fund and a second list of what I would reclaim, not because I am vindictive, but because I am finished donating to a bonfire that pretends to be a hearth, and the lists looked almost professional. like a project plan, which made me laugh out loud, because of course I would turn my own heartbreak into a clean spreadsheet, and that laugh, small and mean and necessary, felt like finding $20 in a winter coat pocket you were about to give away. I slept badly, the way you sleep after a breakup, where every noise is a memory and every memory has teeth, and in the morning I woke to a quiet phone and a clean calendar. And for the first time in years, I did not spend the day calculating who needed what from me before I could have what I needed, and I took a long walk past the neighborhood where the Goodreads live. And I promised myself I would not explain this to anyone who demanded an explanation like a receipt. And here is the part one will not dress up. I felt relief, and then I felt fear, because relief is a cousin to guilt in families like mine, and fear is the language we learn before we learn our names, and yet under both of them something steady hummed. The way a refrigerator hums when the kitchen is empty, a reminder that survival is not a personality flaw, it is a skill. By noon my mother's first message arrived, a paragraph of concern dressed as kindness, asking if I could help with a small thing, nothing major, just a bridge until January. And I stared at the screen and thought about snow days and streaming subscriptions and bridges you repair alone, and I typed exactly nothing, because the button had already been pressed and the page had already refreshed, and whether anyone knew it yet or not, the holidays had just changed forever, and by the time the first bill arrived with her name on it instead of mine, she would understand exactly how quiet I could be. The morning after I pressed the first quiet button and watched my sister's name vanish from the insurance portal like a guest who suddenly remembers a better party down the street, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee that tasted like resolve and opened every account that for years had been set to set it and forget it, because while the generous version of me loved automation, the alert version of me understood that autopay is just a polite way of saying you never need to ask for permission again, and I was done funding anything that announced itself as family while behaving like a subscription service with premium guilt add-ons. I began with the education platform because tuition is not only a bill, it is a clock, and every month my deposit had arrived like a dutiful train while my sister filmed heartfelt speeches about sacrifice and perseverance under flattering kitchen light. Speeches that somehow never included the sentence where she admitted the bursar's office knew my name better than they knew hers, so I navigated to the recurring payments tab, studied the calendar that had been feeding a future that never once invited me to parent-teacher night, and with a long exhale that sounded suspiciously like a laugh, I disabled the schedule, drafted a short, dry note to the finance office requesting that all communications be directed away from me effective immediately, and included one final sentence that would have made any accountant proud: funds going forward will be handled by the legal guardian on record. The moment I hit send, the quiet in my apartment changed shape, not softer exactly, but cleaner, as if a hum I had lived with so long I stopped hearing it had finally been switched off, and with that silence I allowed myself 5 minutes to think about the kids, who are bright and loud and unreasonably good at winning rigged carnival games, and I admitted out loud that while they were not guilty, they were also not my responsibility, and that maybe the most adult thing I could do was separate love from rescue, because in my family those two words share a closet and keep wearing each other's coats. From there I moved across the small constellation of invisible gifts that had been orbiting my bank account for years, the extra phone line I added during a storm and never removed because the storm never really ended, the shared cloud storage I upgraded after my sister's holiday photo dump crashed her account and somehow became my monthly tradition, the wholesale membership that put me on the hook for industrial quantities of paper towels and seasonal candles, the streaming package I agreed to for the kids that reliably charged me while the children reliably recited theme songs, and I canceled each one with the same calm, slow breath, proofreading every confirmation email like it was a treaty, because when you have spent years explaining yourself, there is a sacred pleasure in paperwork that requires no justification at all. By noon, the texts began to arrive with that particular rhythm families use when they think charm and urgency are synonyms, my mother tapping out concerned paragraphs about how communication is key and how we do not punish children for adult problems. My aunt sliding in with a message that read like a coupon for forgiveness if I would only call quickly, and my sister sending a single line that could have been lifted from a motivational poster stapled to a therapist's waiting room, something like choosing joy, except she followed it with a winking face that landed like a thumb on a bruise, and I stared at the screen long enough to feel the old compliance curl its finger, then set the phone face down as if I were putting a child in timeout, and opened my laptop to do one last thing before I allowed the day to touch me. I logged into the state's college savings platform and created 2 accounts in the kids' names with a structure so boring it deserved a plaque. Deposits locked until graduation milestones the school would verify without a parent ever touching the funds. A quiet hedge against the guilt storm I could see brewing on the horizon, because if I was truly the villain they were certain I was becoming, then I could at least be the kind of villain who invests, and when the confirmation PDFs landed in my downloads folder like small, steel birds, I smiled in a way that was not kind and not cruel, but very, very done. It would be dishonest not to say that doubt crept in like a draft under a door I thought I had sealed, because after the cancellations were complete and the protections neatly filed, I saw in my mind every December photo where I stood somewhere in the doorway with a foil pan and a tight smile, and I heard the sound of my mother's laughter bending around the edges of a room I never fully entered. And I wondered if I was making a point or building a wall so high it would end up becoming my view. Yet, even as the doubt shifted the air, my inbox chimed, and a short message from the school arrived with the bland authority of bureaucracy announcing that automatic payments had been halted. The account holder on record had been notified for follow-up, and a hold might be placed if arrangements were not made within a reasonable period, and I felt the old reflex to step in, smooth it over, and write one more check in the name of peace, until I remembered that peace without respect is just quiet. With handcuffs. I made dinner early, the kind of meal that feels like competence rather than celebration, and I ate it at the table without my phone because I did not want to see what came next, and for a sparkling few minutes I believed I had outpaced the storm. Until the first voicemail came in, my mother's voice not wearing any costume at all, just raw and wet, and accusing in that way people get when their favorite lever finally sticks, asking me how I could humiliate the family like this, what the children ever did to me, whether I was happy now that their school had called, and while she said school twice and their names never, the line that caught me was this one, the one that I wrote down word for word on the back of an envelope, because some things deserve a transcript. Do you have any idea what you have started? I listened again, and then I did the pettiest, smartest thing I have ever done, which was exactly nothing. Except for logging into the phone plan and transferring my sister's line off my account with a clean digital signature that closed a door I had been propping open with my own foot for years, and as the confirmation flashed, another call buzzed through from a number I did not recognize, and when I answered it, a voice from the school's financial office asked to confirm that I was no longer responsible for the account, and I said yes in one long, careful breath, and the voice paused, then added a sentence that landed like a match on dry grass. Your mother is here, and she would like to speak to you immediately. The call from the school's office had barely ended when my phone began to light up like a fire alarm, one notification rolling into the next, each message carrying the tone of a family that had suddenly remembered my number only when the lifeline they had taken for granted was cut, and with every ping I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The one that comes from being pulled back into a role you have already resigned from, the unpaid role of fixer, mediator, and unacknowledged provider, who is supposed to accept gratitude only in the form of guilt. My mother's first full voicemail was not so much a conversation as it was a monologue of accusation dressed in grief, her words tumbling one over the other, insisting that I had humiliated her in front of the school administrators, that the children had already been asked questions they should never have to answer, that this was not the way family should behave, and in the same breath she reminded me of how much she had sacrificed to raise me, a catalogue of debts I never asked her to itemize, but which she keeps like a sacred scroll to unroll whenever my refusal to cooperate threatens her preferred version of history. Then came my father's call, his voice lower and steadier, but carrying that same quiet menace he has perfected over decades, telling me I was being cold and calculating. 2 words that might have felt insulting if they did not also feel like the first accurate description of what I was finally becoming, because in my family, warmth has always meant handing over more than you can afford while smiling through clenched teeth, and kindness has been rebranded as silence in the face of mockery and exploitation. He said that I had embarrassed him, that his friends might hear about what had happened at the school, that reputation mattered more than whatever petty quarrel I thought I was fighting, and I hung up before he could build momentum. Because I have lived too long inside his hierarchy where the family name outweighs the family members. By evening, my sister finally broke her silence, unleashing a storm of rage over the phone so loud I had to hold the device away from my ear, her voice cracking as she screamed that I had ruined her children's future, that I had deliberately set out to destroy the stability she had worked so hard to build, as though the word stability applied to a system held together only by my invisible monthly deposits. And she did not even pause to acknowledge the irony of accusing me of sabotage while confessing through every sentence that without my contributions her castle was nothing more than a cardboard facade. She called me selfish, a failure, a bitter woman incapable of joy, and in that moment I felt the strangest kind of freedom, because insults delivered in fury often reveal the truth of what someone has always believed. And hearing her finally say out loud what she had been thinking for years felt less like an attack and more like a release, the mask slipping once and for all. When she shifted her strategy from anger to begging, her voice softening into the same practiced tone she once used to persuade me to co-sign her loans, she promised she would pay me back if I just gave her more time, swore that this was only temporary, and then dangled the children in front of me like bargaining chips, asking if I really wanted to be the kind of aunt who abandoned them in their moment of need. And though the guilt pressed against me like a heavy blanket, I reminded myself that I had never abandoned them. I had been their quiet safety net for years, and the only person who had abandoned them now was their own mother when she gambled with support that was never hers to guarantee. The barrage continued into the night, cousins and distant relatives weighing in with thinly veiled insults disguised as advice, each one reminding me that family disagreements should never spill into money. As if money had not been the silent currency of our relationships all along, as if every smile at Thanksgiving had not been purchased with one more invisible transfer from my account. By the time I scrolled through the messages, each one a blend of disappointment and demand, I realized I had spent my entire adulthood auditioning for a role that never once guaranteed me love in return, only access, only tolerance. And it dawned on me with the force of a revelation that maybe the problem was not that I had finally drawn a line, but that I had waited so long to admit there was one. So I did the thing I had never allowed myself to do before. I went through my contacts and blocked them all, not selectively, not with hesitation, but systematically, one name after another disappearing from my screen like a list of creditors in reverse. And as the silence finally settled, I felt something both terrifying and exhilarating, the sense of a house collapsing behind me while I walked forward with nothing but the clothes on my back. Before I set the phone down for good that night, I listened one last time to my mother's final voicemail, a message stripped of language and reduced to sobs, heavy, unfiltered sounds that once would have pulled me back into orbit, but now landed differently. Not as a summons, but as evidence, proof of a cycle I was no longer willing to repeat, and though part of me ached with the loss, another part whispered that perhaps grief was simply the price of freedom, and maybe, just maybe, it was a bill worth paying. The first night after I severed the last ties and silenced the chorus of messages, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of the streetlight slicing across the room in pale orange bars. And my mind replayed every accusation I had heard that day until the words began to fold into each other like layers of static, leaving behind only one relentless question that would not let me sleep. Had I gone too far? I turned that question over like a stone in my hand, examining every side of it, feeling its weight grow heavier with each hour, because although I had spent the day defending my choices in the privacy of my own thoughts, the truth was that guilt had already crept in, dragging its long shadow into every corner of my apartment until even the silence felt hostile. I told myself that I had not punished the children, that I had only reclaimed what was mine and returned responsibility to their mother. Yet the image of their faces at school, confused and perhaps embarrassed by conversations they never asked to overhear, haunted me like a cruel aftertaste. I remembered the little notes they used to write me after birthdays, the uneven handwriting spelling out thanks for gifts they did not know I had sacrificed for, and I wondered if those same small hands were now gripping backpacks heavier with worry than with books. For a moment the thought of picking up the phone and reversing everything nearly overpowered me, because there is a particular kind of pain reserved for those who know they are right and still fear they are wrong. In the kitchen the next morning, I opened a box of old photographs, the kind I had once intended to organize into albums but never did, and as I sifted through stacks of glossy prints, I saw myself in the background of nearly every holiday. Usually holding a tray of food, cleaning up messes, or standing at the edge of a group shot with a smile that looked polite rather than joyful, and I realized that my place in this family had always been that of a shadow, present, functional, but never truly seen. Those photos pressed the guilt deeper, whispering that maybe invisibility was the role I was born into, and that stepping out of it now was not bravery but betrayal. Still, something in me refused to let go of the anger, and anger is a stubborn companion, the kind that insists on staying even when you try to push it out into the cold. I opened my laptop and began combing through old statements, saved invoices, and the digital dust of years of transactions, because if I was going to live with this guilt, I at least wanted the clarity of facts to steady me. It did not take long before the pattern revealed itself with ruthless precision. The tuition withdrawals from my account that were followed, sometimes within hours, by deposits into my sister's, deposits that did not match what she had claimed to spend, and vacation itineraries with flights and hotels booked suspiciously close to the dates when I had made my largest transfers. The evidence sat there, unflinching, daring me to deny what it was spelling out in black and white, that my so-called sacrifice had been her luxury, and the hardship I thought I was relieving had been nothing more than an act of theater. I scrolled back further, into years when I had believed her sob stories about overdue bills, and found hotel charges, designer receipts, and restaurant splurges that no one with genuine financial struggle would have indulged in. The more I looked, the more the guilt began to shift its shape, no longer heavy and suffocating, but sharp and electric, a fury laced with vindication. Every sob-filled voicemail from my mother, every furious accusation from my sister, every cutting remark from my father, they all began to sound different in my head when played against the backdrop of these numbers. Because it was no longer just my word against theirs. It was math, and math does not lie. For a while I just sat there, the computer screen casting its cold light across my face, and I let out a laugh so bitter it startled even me, because it dawned on me that all these years they had painted me as the one who drained them. The one whose emotions were too heavy, too consuming, too costly, when in fact I had been the one drained, siphoned dry under the banner of family loyalty, and they had the audacity to call my absence from Christmas a relief. Perhaps it was a relief, but not for the reasons they wanted to believe. I thought back to my sister's voice, shrill with outrage, and I imagined telling her that the only thing I had been draining was my own account into her pockets, while she played the martyr, and the thought almost made me want to call her. Not to reconcile, but to let her hear the sound of her own lies collapsing under the weight of proof. Yet I did not call, because some truths are too valuable to spend on people who will never admit they were wrong. Instead, I saved every file into a folder titled simply Receipts, a quiet insurance policy of my own, not for the courts or for any confrontation, but for me, so that the next time doubt tried to sneak in under the door, I would have the evidence to slam it shut. That night, as I closed the folder and shut down the computer, I felt a calm settle over me, not the warm calm of forgiveness or reconciliation, but the cold calm of someone who has stopped questioning whether the wound was real. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and stared out at the December lights strung across the street, twinkling with the forced cheer of a season that has always demanded more than it gave, and I whispered to no one in particular, maybe I was draining, but draining her wallet so she didn't have to touch her own. The words hung in the room like smoke, heavy and undeniable, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel something dangerously close to peace. I woke to a sky the color of unpolished silver and a notification that my mother had tried to reach me again in the middle of the night, and although the message contained no words, only long recordings where her breath hit the microphone like waves against a pier, I understood the language perfectly, because our family has always communicated in instruments rather than sentences, in sobs and sighs, and the clatter of dishes that stands in for apology, and I carried that sound with me to the desk where the folder named receipts sat like a sealed envelope I had been daring myself to open in public, not to shame anyone for sport, not to score a final point in a game that had already cost me years, but to finish what I had begun when I pressed the first button and learned that quiet, by itself, is not peace, it is only the room where peace might one day choose to sit. I made a final list in the same practical hand I used to write grocery notes, a list that contained no insults, no dramatic speeches, only actions that fit inside the boundaries I had finally drawn. And at the top I wrote the plan that felt equal parts petty and just. I would send a single email to the family thread with a link to a locked drive that held copies of the tuition statements, the matching travel confirmations, the overlapping charges that told a story numbers can tell without raising their voice, and I would set the link to expire in just one day, so that anyone who wanted the truth would need to look directly at it rather than drag me back into an argument about tone. And underneath that I wrote the part one had been holding back because it felt like kindness wearing a steel coat, which was that I would also send a quiet note to the school's financial office, not accusing anyone by name, simply confirming in firm language that I was no longer the payer of record and attaching a modest scholarship payment spread across the spring months under the children's student identification numbers, funds released only upon the school's verification that attendance and assignments were on track. A hedge not against my sister's temper, but against the small, fearful faces I could not stop seeing when I closed my eyes. Before I pressed send, I brewed coffee that tasted like resolve and wrote one more message, this time to my bank, arranging for the closure of the shared safety deposit box I had opened years ago when my sister convinced me that family valuables needed a home. A box that had become a metaphor for everything I locked away so nobody else would have to feel the weight, and I scheduled the termination for the first business day of the new year, a clean cut measured not in anger, but in calendars. Then I printed the confirmation, slid it into a plain envelope with both our names, and addressed it to her house with the simplest line I have ever written. Collect what is yours by the date listed, because after that nothing in that box belongs to me, or to you. When the email to the family went out, I did not write a preface, I did not soften the truth with apology or lace it with performance. I simply pasted the link and added a single sentence that sounded like the woman I was becoming rather than the girl I had been trained to be, a sentence that said the record is here for those who want facts instead of stories. After which I powered the thread to mute and turned to the school portal where I executed the modest scholarship transfer, a sum far smaller than what I had given over the years and yet, in its structure, infinitely larger, because it insisted that support be verified rather than assumed and, more importantly, that the children's forward motion not be leveraged as a weapon against me ever again. By late afternoon, the replies began to stack up like weather advisories, my father sending a short demand that I call him immediately because airing finances was a betrayal, my aunt offering a prayer hands paragraph about forgiveness that somehow blamed me for both the storm and the power line it knocked down, and my sister sending a message so long it needed to be expanded, a dizzy scroll of self-justifications, accusations, and finally a threat to tell everyone what I had done as if everyone did not already know that I had been paying for the show while she took bows under the stage lights, and for once I did not reply with facts, because I had already put the facts in a vault that would close in 24 hours. And the only answer I owed her was silence shaped like a closed door. I cooked dinner with the kind of attention I used to reserve for work emergencies, chopping onions until the kitchen smelled sharp and clean, and somewhere between the simmer and the salt I felt the first loosening at the base of my skull. a slackening of a rope I had been holding for so long that my hands were permanently marked by its braided pattern, and I almost missed the knock because it sounded hesitant rather than angry, a polite knock from someone who is not sure they are welcome. And when I opened the door, there was no one in the hallway, only a small padded envelope propped against the frame, unmarked except for my name written in a familiar hand that made my stomach lurch. And inside the envelope was a single photograph I had never seen before, a Christmas morning from years ago, the whole family in pajamas except me, fully dressed, standing at the stove with a wooden spoon and that polite smile that looks almost like joy to anyone not standing in my body. There was a note on the back in shaky cursive that might have been my mother's or might have been a deliberate imitation, a single line that read simply, "I did not see it then," and because there are some sentences that are both apology and accusation at once. I set the photo on the counter and felt the floor tilt under me, not into collapse exactly, but into the kind of new arrangement you get after moving a heavy piece of furniture you convinced yourself you could never lift, and before I could decide whether to cry or laugh, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize, a local exchange, but not one I had stored, and against my better judgment I answered, saying hello with the care you use when addressing a room you cannot see. The voice on the other end was young and steady and did not say my name, only this: "We understand, and we will handle it. Please do not call here anymore." Then the line clicked and the dial tone returned like a curtain falling. And I stood there with the photo in my hand and the smell of dinner in the air and a silence that felt earned rather than imposed, wondering if the voice belonged to one of the children or to someone else entirely, wondering whether handling it meant repair or retaliation, wondering whether my revenge had finally landed on the right doorstep or whether I had simply offered the truth to a house that would break it into pieces and throw them back through my window later. And I realized that the answer would not arrive tonight or maybe not ever, because sometimes the most honest ending you can write is the one where the audience leaves the theater still arguing about who the villain was, while the person who finally stopped paying for the tickets walks home through cold air that tastes, for the first time in years, like hers.